All right, welcome to Curiosities. I'm your host, Mike MacDonald. I've been meaning to figure out kind of the history of why this conflict exists and how did we get here today. So, in this series, this is going to be part one of a multi part series. I'm going to try to keep the segments about 10 to 15 minutes so that way I can kind of make it easily digestible because I want to understand the modern day conflict in the Middle East. Now, in order to do that, I think it's pertinent we need to understand the history of the region. In an effort to understand that, I've read up on a lot of data over the last week, and I'm going to try to condense it into an easily digestible number of segments. Now, in order to do this, we need to literally go back to the biblical era Middle East. There also needs to be understanding that nations and borders really didn't become standardized as we know them today. In other words, nations with well-defined borders and well-defined, deeply established cultures, governments, and so on, none of that existed like we have it now in the modern era. Everything is down to the exact location of borders. Navigation technology back then was very primitive. It was very primitive. And so, in other words, nations and borders, their accurate and exact locations, honestly, were kind of a mess. Keep in mind, too, that human civilizations going back 3,000 years, we were very primitive. And I mean us as in all of us, in all humankind. And so the history of this region is highly complex, and the records are nowhere near as detailed and contextual as you would expect them to be nowadays. And so we kind of have to glean information based on the writings of that go back 2,500, 3,000 years, and so on. I'm going to start off about 2,500 BCE or before Common Era. For the purposes of this segment series, BC and BCE are going to be interchangeable. AD and CE are also going to be interchangeable. And for those that aren't aware, you have BC, which is before Christ, or BCE, same thing, before Common Era. Kind of when the year clock started back at zero was when Christ was on the earth, but that's also named for the non-religious types BCE, before Common Era. The Middle East used to be called the Ancient Near East, but we call it the Middle East now, so I'm going to use that nomenclature. So I'm going to start technically in the second millennium BC with the land of Canaan. It's commonly accepted by pretty much any scholar or historian that the Israelite culture overlapped with Canaanite culture, and so from the earliest times, Israel has existed in this region, which is here on the screen, going back to the earliest recorded accounts. Now, I was kind of wondering, what does Israel mean? And it's from the Hebrew word Yisra, which means struggles with. And then El, Yisrael, is the shorthand for Elohim, or God. So literally means struggles with God. In 2500 BC, you had, including in all this, you had the Sumerian Empire. They loosely consisted of what we would call nation states. These included, it was now modern Saudi Arabia, Iraq. There's a river called Shat al-Arab. It's a relatively quick-flowing river that's about 120 miles long that empties into the Persian Gulf, which is actually not on this map. There were many little kingdoms kind of along this river, because if you're going to establish a civilization, you kind of have to have fresh water. Okay. Now, this river is formed by the confluence of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and flows south into the Persian Gulf. These civilizations or kingdoms go by Nagar, Assur, Nibiru, Isin, Umma, Eridu, and a handful of others. Now, most of these civilizations are long gone, but the Jewish people, they're the ones that lasted kind of a long time. They outlived all these other kingdoms. Okay, most of them were traders. They traveled by animals, and if you were fancy, you would use the river to travel the region. I should also point out, obviously, in this era, Christianity and the Muslim faith did not exist. But the Jewish people, the Hebrews, they had their relationship with the Abrahamic God, Elohim, God, the Christian God, one and the same. And obviously the Muslim faiths, they have Muhammad, but that's going to come later on. During these times, all these civilizations that occupied the region, a lot of their existence overlapped each other. Look over here, you have the land of Judah, you have Philistia, Simeon, Manasseh, Gad, Reuben, Naphtali, Asher, Zebulun. All of these were all the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay. Now, if you've read the story, if I remember correctly, 12 tribes were the 12 sons of Abraham. And so all of them had, this was where they lived. This region literally going back 3 millennia. That's a long time. But how did we get here? In the next segment, I'm going to be going over the history of this region briefly, because there was a lot of infighting, but a lot of the pertinent stuff that occurred that's influencing the occurrences for today didn't really occur until the Roman Empire. And that's going to be in the next series. So any comments, anything that you guys want to add or questions you want to ask, I can pick up and address in another episode. By all means, leave a comment down below and click that like button, subscribe, and it really helps us grow. Curiosities is growing. We've got, I think we just crossed 2,200 and almost 2,300 actually, as far as our subscriber count. So thank you to those that have subscribed. And thanks so much. I hope to give you some more insight into the next episode.
New Kingdom Radio Theater.